Hi, everybody. I'm so pleased to be able to speak with you. I had really and truly hoped to meet you all in person, and a lot of work went into that, but it didn't work out. So I'm happy that there can at least be some interaction this way. I'm a lifetime peace activist who came to work on climate in 2019, and I immediately saw the connections between climate and militarism, and recognize that it's the same entities that are sending our young people here in the United States off to fight in these asymmetrical, illegal wars that are also responsible for a great deal of the climate change. So I've been focusing on that since about 2019. I work primarily with three national organizations here in the US. So that's Veterans for Peace. My husband was a Vietnam veteran who was profoundly impacted by the war and died in 2012. And so I'm a founding member of the FP's Climate Crisis and Militarism Project, and we've been working very diligently on that the last couple of years. I'm also with a faith group, Unitarian Universalists for a Just Economic Community, which covers all kinds of diverse justice issues economically, but they've allowed me to just focus very narrowly on my own area. And then I'm also with the Women's International League for Peace and Freedom, US, and with WILFP's International Environmental Working Group. And I was fortunate enough to be one of 10 women who will represent WILFP International at this year's COP27. So I'm actually speaking to you from Egypt, although the COP won't start until Monday. WILFP has done a lot of work on this in preparation, and I'll put a link in the chat. Some of you might be interested, particularly in our first two programs on a climate of insecurity for COP27 that were focused on Africa. And then there was a third on MENA, on the MENA region. So I'll put that in the chat for you. When we go to COP, what we're expecting to focus on primarily is the Green Fund and loss and damages, the disproportionate impacts on women and girls, the need for reducing militarism, ending wars, and not allowing the militaries of the world to get away with avoiding responsibility for their own greenhouse gas emissions that are really fueling climate. So, sorry, poor Matt. Oh, poor Matt, you're so exhausted. I'm sorry, you've been working so hard. So what I'll be doing for my part of it primarily is focusing on this whole issue of military emissions. So we know that the United States is the world's largest contributor to greenhouse gas emissions as an institution. And those of you who have been following climate change know too that if we're going to meet this 1.5 degree goal of the Paris Agreement, that all the emissions have to be counted. And the problem is that military emissions have been excluded from being counted since the 1997 Kyoto Accords. So they have now been changed and updated to be voluntary, but even those reportings are not adequate. So I really appreciate what all of you out there are doing to help build peace, to build coalitions, to find new ways to confront old evils, because all of us play our part here. And I really wish, and I hope to watch all of your presentations. Matt's let me know that a lot of this will be filmed and recorded, so I'll be able to watch it later. One of the things that WILFP is doing, Veterans for Peace, is we're planning on writing a letter directly to the IPCC asking for appropriate measures to be taken. So I'm hoping that maybe a clipboard can be passed around at the convention, and you can provide me with any contact information so that when that comes out, I can get in touch with you. Scientists for Global Responsibility tells us that the Worldwide militaries are responsible for 6% of annual emissions. So this goes far beyond um, uh, the normal range of most institutions. And that includes, of course, extractive industries. That includes smelting and refining and manufacture of everything from aircraft carriers to fighter jets, bombs, and nuclear weapons. So, and of course, the aircraft carriers are just floating bases, and we've got 750 of them stationary around the world. So, this is a massive undertaking to fund and supply energy to all of these bases. One thing I'd like you all to jot down, if you're not familiar with it, is the term full spectrum dominance. This is part of the US military's policy going forward. And what it means is that they want in complete control of the area, land, sea, subterranean land, air, atmosphere, and outer space, as well as information space. So when some of you look at the United States and you see that our population here appears dreadfully ignorant, you can understand perhaps that the media that is put out in this country is largely very warped, and the disinformation is very real. So a lot of us don't know a great deal about Africa, and I'm hoping that what you put out in your conference, I'll be able to bring back to the people here and share that. There's been tremendous amount of disinformation on climate change in general, going back to the George W. Bush, Dick Cheney era with ExxonMobil, that has really helped sway the population. So now we go to the COP. This is where the COP comes into play. Antonio, as those of you who have really watched all of this unfold will clearly see, it hasn't been working. Antonio Guterres, the Secretary General, tells us that the IPCC's sixth assessment report is code red for humanity. And this report tells us that unless 2024 is a year of peak emissions, with every succeeding year showing deep emission cuts, that limiting rising temperatures to the 1.5 degrees Celsius goal will be out of reach. Not only will that be out of reach, but so will the 2 degrees Celsius goal. So the urgency here is far beyond what most of us are aware of or can conceive of. So despite this bad news and COP and its many failures, we do have a small window of action. And I'm really hoping that we can collaborate and make the very most, not only of this COP, but of the year ahead. It was very inspiring last year to see 100,000 people in the streets of Glasgow. That is not likely to happen in Sharm el-Sheikh, which is an enclosed structure away from any large cities like Cairo. And what we saw at the 26th last year was that there were some 500 representatives with strong ties to the fossil fuel industry, which was more than the total number of global indigenous people present at the COP. We've got to counter this. Greenpeace UK reported that 30,000 leaked files showed corporations and nations, including Saudi Arabia and OPEC, had pressured the IPCC to focus on potential technical solutions, excuse me, and exclude language calling for phasing out fossil fuels. In the end, COP's weakened language called for this phase out rather than the phase out of fossil fuels. We've got to counter that. There's also documents that Edward Snowden leaked showing interference by the NSA and US, that's the National Security Organization, with that monitored representatives and heads of state in 2009 and CIA interference in 2007. Excuse me. But what we have to focus on right now is that this 1997 Kyoto Protocol exempted military emissions reporting to the UNFCCC, and as a result of U.S. pressure. Again, we have to counter this. But it didn't just stop there. This early influence over the IPCC has had a profound impact on the climate crisis, not only because these emissions were not required to be reported, but also because a deliberate effort was made to have the reporting protocols themselves shield military emissions from scrutiny. This is considered a means of maintaining confidentiality and was achieved by having military emissions lumped together with civilian emissions rather than reported separately. Well, the Paris Agreement made these emissions reporting voluntary. The IPCC's protocols remain. We've got to counter this. So my focus at COP27 will be to call for the IPCC to update its military protocols to be inclusive of all aspects of military emissions, including supply lines, bunker fuels, and the war-related emissions. We've come to the point in time where there's no such thing as a winnable war. All of the emissions that the militaries are putting back out are coming back to us in the form of deadly climate crisis. Of course, ultimately, the best way to reduce emissions is to end militarization and wars, to move the money from death and destruction to life, climate mitigation, and adaptation. We must have peace. So the work that every single one of you are doing at this conference in Africa is critical to the effort. It takes all of us. We've got to all work together, play our parts, and try to really bring peace in order to mitigate climate change. So, as I said, WILFP will be seeking international support for a letter outlining all of this, and it will be directed to IPCC. And I'm hoping that those of you who are at all interested would take this to your own organizations and consider signing it onto it when the time comes. So, shukran. I will put the links in the chat that are relevant. I do want to point out this one book, Pentagon Climate Change and War, put together by Nita Crawford, who has headed up the Cost of War project at Brown University. It really lays out a lot of valuable information if you're at all interested in this subject. So thank you very much. I wish I could be with you. Take care. Peace. Back to you, Matt.